ثم أما بعد, welcome everyone to this final session tonight. And the session tonight is entitled trying to find the exact title. Yes, Gaza, Atrocities, Guilt, Sadness, and Optimism. So this panel will discuss different aspects regarding what is happening in Palestine and our role in the matter and our feelings regarding what's going on, what we can do more, how to feel about things that we can have no control over, and the like. And before we pass it on to our esteemed sheikhs, I just want to start off by, of course, all of us may feel a little helpless or very helpless about what's going on, because of the lack of ability for us to do more than what we would like to do. And all of us here, I'm sure, they bear witness before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that if we could do more, then we would do more. And we've witnessed firsthand how this community has come together and benefited and done as much as they could to help. And I'm sure even on an individual level, each and every one of us is doing what we can, the least of which is making dua. And of course, no one should think that this is something that's insignificant. But on top of that, many of us may be feeling guilt by doing other things as well. Many of us may be feeling guilt by not doing things directly related to the cause of Palestine. We're doing khayr. I feel guilty by teaching Quran, going back to my Sunday school, teaching the kids. I feel guilty by going back to my lessons about learning about fiqh al-salah and siyam and zakah. Is this the time for this shit? I may feel guilty about doing other khair, doing other good that I used to do, when I feel like all the khair and all the energy and all the talks that I give and all the classes that I give must be and should be on this particular topic, and never should I do anything else. And I will just allude to the fact that, number one, on top of doing everything that we can, alhamdulillah, inshallah, we have been, there is no problem by also continuing to do khair and seeking knowledge and doing good outside of directly being involved in this particular issue. And all of this, inshallah, aids in helping the cause in the Ummah of Muhammad ﷺ and giving it victory and spreading directly or indirectly, one way or another. And this leads eventually, inshallah, to the victory of the Muslims in the occupied lands. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself, he mentions that when the believers were to go out to war, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala even says that it's not necessary for all the believers to march out to war. Rather, he said a party of you is to march out to war, and a part of you is to stay to learn about the deen and have fiqh of the deen, so that when the people come back, there are those who teach them about the deen. So Allah himself even tells us that even in the time of war, there are people who are to learn the deen and have fiqh of the deen and study the deen, do this other khayr that's not directly related to warfare, even at the time of warfare, so that the deen continues to be passed on and taught and spread. And even the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ himself, while marching in battles, in the middle of going to war, he would talk to the companions and teach about other things. He would be teaching about ahkam of purification, of tahara, in the middle of marching to war. This is a ruling of this is a ruling of that. Someone will say, is this the time to talk about this? Yet the Prophet did not allow going to warfare to stop him from also doing other khair and teaching the deen and spreading it. So the point is, before I pass it on to the mashayikh, dear brothers and sisters, this guilt that we may be feeling, if it is to stop you from doing other khair, then do not allow that. Because even Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as we said, and the Prophet went, have others learn the deen and teach it to others, even in the time of warfare. So you do what you can, you make dua, you donate, like we spoke about the issue of boycotting products and the like, but you do what you can, and then you continue to do the khair of spreading this deen and giving it victory and increasing its numbers and teaching others about Islam. This is what you can do, and this is one of the greatest ways, whether you know it or not, to give victory to the cause of the oppressed Muslims around the world. So that is just a point I wanted to make, and inshallah we'll pass it down to our esteemed mashayikh who will continue on this theme. And inshallah, if it's okay, we'll just start from the end of the table and move forward with our esteemed Sheikh Ahmed Makki. فليتفضل مشكور.
Esteemed, huh? Yalla, the esteemed microphone. Why not? Did you turn it off?
No,
Over there?
I don't.
Maybe that one's off.
Yeah, they work together. All right.
Or steaming this one.
You're like one ummah. It's all clear. Yeah, it's working. طيب بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. It has to be on all the time. They both work together. والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه أما بعد. So, first thing I want to start with is that, first, we know that a lot of people have frustration because they want to do something. And there's, like I had a meeting with some of the youth in our masjid, and their frustration is they want to do something. And there's nothing, they just sit back, make dua, be a better Muslim, and they don't feel like that's enough. So the first thing is, like we ruled out, you can't physically do anything. If I told you, yes, do something physically, what are you going to do? And what, you're going to get on a kayak, buy a ticket to Jordan, you're going to get there and 4 officers are going to welcome to Jordan. Then you're going to see a black cell you'll never get out of. Or what, you're going to take it into Cairo, and then be like, Tfaddali habibi, ahlan wa sahlan, and boom, you're going to go into a prison, you're never going to see the light of day. But what are you going to do? So do you know there's nothing to do? So then you're left with the boycotting, the rallies, the being politically active. But we love to tear each other down. So there are some people who are very angry with the boycott. And what are their reasons? They just like their mocha chocolate garbaccino from the Starbucks. And they're upset because now they can't get their garbaccino because of the boycott, so they're upset. And I've seen people, even speakers, if you follow this nonsense of boycotting, let me tell you why I'll respect those who boycott. The same way I used to wear the mask during COVID. The problem, one of the problems we have in America, this exaggerated sense of individuality, all right? I'm not convinced, I won't do it. With no regard for other people in the community. I'll wear the mask, I don't care what the studies show that the mask is useless, I don't care. You know why? Because when I wear the mask to the masjid, the uncle feels comfortable that I'm wearing the mask. I will do it for him. I'll do it for the respect for my community because it makes people feel good. Not everything is about us and as an individual. Oh, I'm not convinced about the mask. Studies show this about the mask that it doesn't really work, and so I'll take it off and make everyone uncomfortable. Not everything's about you. So there are people who feel really helpless. There are people on the edge of depression, and doing something, even if it's little, even if it's a drop in the bucket, makes them feel like they're doing something. So don't belittle. If you don't believe in rallies, don't belittle that. Let the people go out and scream. Let your wife go out to the rally. Isn't it better than she screams at you? My wife is Palestinian, and because she's not here, I can speak with confidence. I'm saying she'll go to the rallies. I won't go on like in the fields. I'd rather she screams in the street than she comes and screams at me. I'm kidding. I scream at the house. Nobody screams at me. But the point is that let people be comfortable doing what they're doing. We love to tear things down. Actually, this happened to my wife one time. She was at a class, and she was having a conversation with another sister about how they boycott, and they boycott Coca-Cola and everything. And a third sister joined the conversation. When she heard that they're saying boycott, she ran to the water cooler, grabbed a can of Coke and came, and then opened it in between them. If I want to start with, do I have to finish everything I have right now, or do we go back and forth? Let them finish, huh? But wait, let me get everything out of the way. So respect what everyone's doing. You don't have to tear down everything, whether you believe it or not. Sometimes you're okay with it just because it makes people feel better. What if someone tells you, I have a really big problem, like a family problem, can you spare me just 1 hour? I can talk to you about it on Sunday. And you are certain you can't help them. Would you meet them and let them talk to you? Yeah? Because isn't there a release for them when they talk to you, even if you can't help them? So do it for them. So that's one thing I didn't want to mention, because I see a lot of tearing each other down and people trying to ridicule what the other person is. Oh, what's this going to do, huh? You boycott? Because of your coffee, you think you're going to free Al-Aqsa? I never said that. You're going to free Al-Aqsa. All right? The other thing is, for a lot of people, it serves as a wake-up call and
We've seen just from the non-Muslims becoming Muslim. We've seen there's some optimism. There's change. Like public opinion has never changed so much since October 7th until now. It changed more than it has in the last 40 or 50 years. Like we would be like, we would feel like we're the only ones who can see in a world of blind people. We would see what's happening on Jazeera, and then on CNN, oh, nothing is happening. And we'd be so frustrated. Now everybody is able to see it. This guy in Seattle told me, we went to a rally for Palestine. When it was time for Salah, only 14 people prayed. The rest were just white folks who supported the cause. That has never happened before. So a lot of things that came that were positive, and as I said last night, the sadness, that is not the way of the believer, to be perpetually sad and to be like a borderline state of depression. And the last thing I want to say is that people were saying, like some of the youth were saying to me, that all we hear from the mashayikh is like, there's nothing you can do. You can engage in these activities politically and boycotting and rallies and all that, but be a better Muslim. Just go and improve yourself. And they said, like, I feel like that's not really doing anything. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, وَأَنْتُمُ الْأَعْلَوْنَ, and you will have the upper hand in kuntum mu'mineen, if you are true believers. So that means one task we have, make sure you go home and you're a true believer. Because if everybody checks themselves, make sure they're a true believer, then who gets the upper hand? The true believers. You're doing your part. Your part is 1 in, I don't know how many billion, a billion point what. Don't belittle that. That's all I want to say. I'll leave the heavy stuff for the Mashayikh.
Next, inshallah, we have also our esteemed Sheikh Jamaal Zarabozo. فليتفضل مشكور.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على النبي محمد وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. أما بعد. First of all, let me say that when you are invited to partake in the panel, and especially if you're invited just because there's empty spaces up here, there's a lot of like game theory that goes on whenever you're invited on one of these panels, because you never want to be stuck with like the only thing that you thought about saying, everybody else just said before you. So you have to like plan ahead and try to figure out that you have something. Yes, plan B and plan C and so forth. So I came up with an idea of what to speak about. I'm not sure how well this is going to go, but definitely I was pretty sure that nobody else is going to speak about this, and that's why I chose to speak about this. And it's a little bit building on the lecture that I gave yesterday. The lecture that I gave yesterday was fairly pessimistic, and I will continue that pessimism today, inshallah. And then hopefully tomorrow night there'll be a glimmer of optimism in the midst of this pessimism. And so this, we often look at like problems and issues that are going on, and we look at it at a very micro level. And of course, you have to analyze things at a micro level and also a macro level as well. You cannot also like ignore like the bigger picture of what is going on. And in particular, we know that the Islamic civilization was at one time the dominant paradigm for much of humanity. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala took that ni'mah basically of us and the honor that we had with Islam. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala took this ni'mah away from us. And we know that Allah doesn't take ni'mah away unless حَتَّى يُغَيْرُ مَا بِأَنفُسِهِمْ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't take the ni'mah away from people unless they change what is in themselves. And unfortunately, in the past couple of centuries, we have changed a lot. And all of humanity, not just us as Muslims, but all of humanity needs us as Muslims to go back to the Quran and Sunnah reinvigorate Islam and bring the truth and justice of Islam to humanity. And instead, what has happened in the past couple of centuries, the past few centuries, is basically the Western paradigm, and aspects of the Western paradigm have taken over the Islamic paradigm. And unfortunately, because Europe went through a very particular history, the rest of the world is basically suffering under that history that Europe experienced. Like, for example, I mean, if you just think about the idea of a homeland for the Jews. I mean, if you just think of that idea. Well, the Jews for centuries have been living in Muslim lands without any issue. There was no Jewish question or Jewish problem in any of the Muslim lands. The Jewish question and the Jewish problem was a European thing. This is a European thing. Actually, by the way, Zionism didn't even start with Jews. Also, Zionism, the idea of Zionism and the idea of establishing this homeland for the Jews, this actually started with what we call nowadays like evangelical type Christians, centuries ago. But one of the things that developed was this idea of nationalism. Nationalism is another pure European product, and the nation state is a pure European product that it has exported to the rest of the world. And unfortunately, us as a Muslim ummah, we have bought into it, and we have accepted it for ourselves to such an extent that if you probably even ask Muslims, even Muslim thinkers and leaders, to be able to think outside of the framework of the nation state, the nationalism, they can't even do it. All the Muslim movements since the fall of the Caliphate, which by the way, 100 years ago this year, at least according to the Western calendar, 100 years ago. 100 years ago was basically when the Turkish Republic brought an end to the Caliphate. All of the movements since then have basically accepted the idea of a nation state. Nation state is only a few hundred years old. Where you create this fictitious idea of a nation. It's a fictitious idea. There's no such thing as a nation. You create this fictitious idea of a nation and then you give it all sovereignty. The nation can do whatever it wants and nobody can say anything about it. For example, this nation, if the rulers of this nation, for example, want to target an American citizen and kill an American citizen, nobody can do anything about it. I mean, in the Supreme Court discussions recently, it seems like even a president can target a political opponent and maybe nothing can be done about it. Because the sovereignty all belongs to the state and the state can do essentially whatever it wants. Sovereignty does not belong to any greater order, greater power. Doesn't belong to, for example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Every Muslim state recognizes that the sovereignty doesn't belong to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It belongs to the nation. And in the process of creating this nation, as I said, you come up with this fictitious idea that we are a certain people. And what happened throughout the 1800s, especially towards the end of the 1800s, ethnic cleansing was one of the main ways in which states were created. Ethnic cleansing. Towards the end of the 1800s, literally millions of Muslims, when the Ottoman Empire lost Bulgaria and when Crimea was taken over, literally millions of Muslims were forced to move from their lands to another land. Why? Because they don't fit the ethnicity of this new nation state. Greeks, for example, Greeks were living in parts of the Ottoman Empire. Then all of a sudden you have this idea known as Greek nationalism and you create the Greek state. And what happens? Millions of Greeks or hundreds of thousands of Greeks have to leave Turkey to move to Greece. They don't belong in Turkey anymore. You're not our ethnicity, you're not our people. You have to get out. You can still visit Turkey and see some villages which are empty. You can see the buildings where Greeks used to live. And under this idea of nationalism and ethnic cleansing, well, they don't belong there anymore. At least it wasn't genocide. Genocide is where you intentionally seek to demolish or bring an end to a people. Ethnic cleansing, you just move them out, move them someplace else. So when people are talking about, like, ever since the creation of Israel, Israel had this idea of ethnic cleansing of the Palestinians. And people are shocked by that. The reality is no European state at that time would have any objection to the idea of ethnic cleansing to form a nation. That's the reality. Ethnic cleansing did not become against international law and can be persecuted in the International Court of Justice until after Bosnia and Serbia, what happened there. It was only after that these Western nations got together and said, you know what, maybe ethnic cleansing should be illegal. So yes, Israel was created on the idea of ethnic cleansing, but so were many Western states. And this is coming, it's coming from this idea we are creating a nation. In order to create a nation, you have to be this kind of people. And if you're not this kind of people, you don't belong in this nation. Especially if you want to have quote unquote democracy. The worst thing for Israel, as a political state right now, is if they embrace the Gaza and the West Bank, and you have a one-state solution, where everybody gets a fair and equal vote. Well, the Jews are going to be outnumbered. That will be the end of the Zionist project. So there's no way they can have that. But these are key cornerstones, as I said, this idea of nation and nation state and nationalism. We find even Muslims fighting each other over the same issue. And people are willing to die for the sake of their nation. Imagine that. They're not dying for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They are willing to die for the sake of their nation. And these are, as I said, some of the bigger picture of the state of the Muslim Ummah now, as I said, building on my lecture yesterday. This is the state of the Muslim Ummah now that we've gone so far from Islamic perceptions that we have accepted many times because of the result of colonialism and for many reasons. But our whole frame of mind and frame of working is so distant from Islam that it's not surprising that we're not seeking and we're not finding solutions from Islamic solutions or working based on Islamic issues, based on Islamic premises. We find some glimmer. People talk about the Ummah when it comes to Palestine, especially when it comes to Jerusalem and so forth. We find some glimmer of the idea of Ummah. But the idea of Ummah and nation state really don't go together. So this nation state can't do anything. They're not going to do anything about Israel because we need to protect our nation state. The other country also the same. They're not going to do the same because they're worried about their own national interests. And so this is what we've become as an Ummah. And as I said, it's probably even like this idea that the Islamic worldview is so different from what we find now, what they call modernity. And of course, they give modernity this nice name. It feels like, now you're modern. Any other ideas are backward. Well, this is what modernity has brought us. Things like genocides, things like ethnic cleansing and so forth, things like nations going to fight one another in the name of nationalism and so forth. This is modernity. I'm not saying that there were never wars before and so forth. But now the purpose of the wars, the natures of the wars, the natures of genocide and so forth, have basically, it's a new paradigm. And until us as Muslims kind of like wake up and recognize that big things need to be changed, I think as an ummah, we'll continue to go through these different crises because this kind of nation state, the nationalism idea, it's not going to work. It's definitely not going to work for Muslims. So, like we've been stated, what has been stated many times, and like what the Sheikh Ahmed said, we need to continue, even during times of fighting, we need to continue to study every community. Ta'if of them, there should be a group of every community that is studying the deen, and so they can pass on to everybody else what is the essence of the deen and what is the essence of what is needed for us under different circumstances. Wallahu alam, and as I said, inshallah, hopefully tomorrow night, if I make it tomorrow night, that will be my glimpse of optimism. So continue on the pessimism.
That's really sorry.
Pessimism, inshallah. And then we switch tomorrow, inshallah. If he shows up. If he shows up tomorrow, then there'll be a little bit of optimism. That's the promise, inshallah. So just very briefly, inshallah, because it's getting late, bringing it a little bit closer to where we are now in the current crisis that we see. So it was 18 years ago that Hamas won an election, a democratic election in Gaza, or in Palestine. And it was held as the most democratic, free elections that have ever taken place in the Middle East, and with European observers and foreign observers. And they won the election. By the following year, the US and Israel, the Zionist entity, tried to overthrow them and failed. And when that failed, they began this blockade, a full blockade, land, air, and sea, a complete and devastating blockade on Gaza. Now that blockade has been going on for the last 17 years, and it's the longest blockade that's been recorded in history. There is never, at any point in history, has there been a blockade that has gone on for this long, at least known or recorded. So this is the longest blockade of a small strip of land with over 2 million people who happen to be Muslims in Gaza. And the blockade allows them to decide exactly what goes in, exactly what comes out. We let food in when we want to, water in when we want to, baby formula when we want to. We choose when to let it in, when to stop, how many calories per person should be let in. وَإِنَّا فَوْقَهُمْ قَاهِرُونَ. And we have all power over them. So this is the situation that has been there for the last 17 years. And on top of that, every couple of years, you have the bombardment, the bombing, 2-ton bombs, as we see now, on neighborhoods, on city blocks, on residential buildings, every couple of years. And they call it mowing the lawn. So every couple of years, you have to mow the lawn, make sure that the resistance doesn't become powerful enough to actually fight back. Why would they do that? Simply because they've refused to give in, to submit to the Zionist world order, which will eventually allow them to annex the rest of the land and take control of all of it, as they believe they have a biblical prophecy that promises them that. So, I mean, we all know the story by now. The question is, does what we see actually have any effect on us? Sheikh Kamal mentioned that some of the youth are coming and they would like to be doing more. At least, inshallah, hopefully that's a good start. The fact that we're affected. The fact that we feel a connection to the ummah that maybe we didn't feel before. Maybe this is the path back to what Sheikh Jamaal mentioned of the ummah coming back to a sense of unity that has been broken down over time. When we see Muslims annihilated and starved, do we at least recognize the blessings of Allah in our own lives? When we're putting our kids to sleep with full stomachs every night, what would it feel like not to be able to feel them for a night, or feed them for a night or for 2 nights?
What would it feel like to go to sleep and not have that safety and security, not know if your building is going to be the next one bombed? So have we at least recognized the blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in our own lives? Has it caused us to make any changes ourselves? You know, we have some of the stories that we get from Islamic history that almost seem like myths now. When one Muslim woman in the Byzantine Empire, she's dragged towards the jail and she yells out, "Wa mu'tasima." She calls out the name of the Amir al-Mu'mineen, the Khalifa of the time, and word reaches him. So he threatens the leader, he sends a letter, min Amir al-Mu'mineen ila Kalb al-Rum, from the leader of the believers to the dog of the Romans. I'll send an army whose beginning will be where you are and its end will be where I am, from Baghdad to Turkey. Right? And there was an honor, there was a glory in the ummah. Obviously, we're not at that point now, but do we at least have that honor in our hearts? Is that glory? Has that honor been reborn in our hearts before it can practically exist within the ummah again? And I'll leave you with just one hadith, inshallah. A man in his grave, and the angels come to this man in the grave. They come to him with a whip of fire. So he's going to be punished in the grave. So he starts mentioning to the angels his good deeds, his salah and his siyam and his zakat, and he starts mentioning some of the good works that he had done. So when he does that, the punishment is then reduced to one whip. But it's so severe that it causes him to be completely knocked unconscious, and fire fills his grave. فَلَمَّا أَفَاقَ, when he wakes up after that, he asked, بِمَا جَلَدْتُمُونِي, for what did you whip me? What was this punishment for? And it said to him, إِنَّكَ سَمِعْتَ رَجُلًا يَسْتَغِيثُ مَظْلُومًا فَلَمْ تُعِفْهُ. Because you heard a man, listen to the reason. Why was he punished in the grave? You heard a man call out who was oppressed, and you didn't come to his aid. You heard a person who was oppressed call out asking for help, and you didn't come to his aid. And that was punishment in the grave for that. So how many cries have we heard? How many calls from Gaza has the ummah heard? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala only knows what each one of us is capable of. And we're not held accountable for more than that which we're capable of, but the scholars have mentioned that you only free yourself by doing whatever is in your capacity. Whatever is within your capacity is what frees you. That's your salvation in a situation like this one. So whatever it is, whatever we're able to do, we need to be doing at this point. And we need to start with ourselves. And the first thing we can do is renew our pledge to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When the trials fell upon the Sahaba, we all know the story of Bay'at al-Ridwan, when the rumors spread that Uthman had been killed, and this is a trial, this is a calamity upon the Ummah, the Muslims did what? They hastened to renew their pledge to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His Messenger. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed verses, لَقَدْ رَضِيَ اللَّهُ عَنِ الَّذِينَ يُبَايِعُونَكَ تَحْتَ الشَّجَرَةِ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is well pleased. They came and they gave pledge to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam under the tree. So at least what we can do, when the calamities befall the Ummah, renew our pledge to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Remember the blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in our lives, and do whatever is within our capacity to do.
Barakallahu feekum. Inshallah, we have some time for questions while we wait for Sheikh Salah, inshallah, if he's going to come. So inshallah, now he's not going to call us, then we'll take questions. Inshallah, we have time until 10:30. So we'll go back and forth. We'll start with the sisters and the brothers until time is up, inshallah. So you either can raise your hand or you can send up some random questions. Yes?
But after 9/11, it's been pacified, and we've had to basically alienate ourselves from the public sphere and only practice our Islam through worship, prayers, and but the essence of what we're dealing with now goes back to humanity, right? But it's difficult these are our people that are being butchered and slaughtered because we're afraid of that backlash. Do you envision when a tribe, for example, a tribe to revive that sense of struggle? Do you envision a similar backlash to what happened after 9/11? Or have the times changed?
So in summary, the question was, Islam has not historically been a pacifist religion. Rather, there are ways to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through acts of worship like prayer and fasting and the like, but there's also military struggle and there's physical struggle and so on. But after 9/11 and after certain events in the world, Muslims were reduced to being more pacifist in that they could only worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through prayer and personal acts of worship. And now, during protests, the question is, if Muslims try to go back to the way that they were before, being prohibited from expressing their religion in other ways, do you think that the same will happen again after 9/11, where Muslims are cracked down upon and the like? And so, did I get that right? So, inshallah, who would like to take that question?
Me.
Or Shukran or anyone, or Shukran or anyone. Just one letter difference.
It's a big letter.
This guy once asked someone, he said, do foxes give birth to live babies or eggs? He said, well, live foxes are crafty, you can expect anything from them. So it's the same answer. Yeah, they could try to make it. I mean, you have to be careful what you say these days. Like they could, as one sheikh was warning me, he said they're trying to make it look like if you say anything pro-Hamas, that you're giving material aid to terrorists, and they will try to slap anything on you. Like if there's one thing that I completely believe, that is every Western value, okay, it's subject to whether or not it serves their purpose or works against them. Any Western value, no matter how dear, if it starts backfiring and working against them, and like Muslims can take it, they will write it off, they will put it on pause, they will temporarily remove it. So I'm only answering that part of the question. I think it was a bit more complex than that. So the false answer was my answer.
We'll take a question from the men now. Yes.
Oh, that's it? That was the answer, Yani? There's no more heavy, no more meat from the mashayikh? I just gave the rice, Yani. That's some lah.
Shukran, would you like to add to that?
So the question was, what's the expectation, right? Is that the question?
Yes.
Or
So-
like how do you, jihad, obviously, maybe jihad is just at this point, but how can you, it can't be presented or spoken about.
Wow. So as Sheikh Kamal mentioned, and by the way, there was one time in which people thought that this man was Jamaal Zarabozo at one time. But anyway, we won't go into that. So expectations. So as the Sheikh Kamal mentioned, I mean the situation is if the government fears some kind of a political threat, or and it doesn't have to be necessarily that there's a real threat, but if the government feels like the use of fear with respect to Muslims is a good political tool, then they will use it. I mean, if, for example, if the Muslim, let's say, like right now, we have a situation going on between the United States and the Houthis and what they call the axis of resistance and so forth. So at some point in time, like if this escalates, they might feel like, okay, it's now necessary for us to make sure that we paint all Muslims as the enemy once again. And then then the idea of like concentration camps and this kind of thing. And we already have, we already have a president, not a president, but we already have a seemingly already candidate in one of the parties we know that his people, and this is not something strange for that kind of way to go. And the other party is not that much better, don't get me wrong. So yes, as brother Kamal so eloquently said about the fox, you can expect anything, and if the challenges or if the political expediency becomes such, then yes, you could get a repeat of what happened after 9/11. The only difference, the only real difference that is going on right now is that much of the clamoring that is going on about the situation is not necessarily coming from Muslims. It's coming from, for example, a lot of Jews. And that was true, for example, before the Iraq War. That wasn't true, basically going to bomb Afghanistan like everybody in Congress except one person voted we should go and bomb Afghanistan. When it came to Iraq, there was lots of demonstrations against the Iraq War. And these demonstrations were not necessarily, obviously they weren't even led by Muslims. It wasn't Muslim. So even if there's a strong, like, political or a strong, basically in the end, the powers that be, the government and so forth, or the deep state, whatever, however you want to describe it, it's a point that Noam Chomsky makes over and over again. They're not really interested in the will of the people. So they can use these things as a tool, as a weapon. They can weaponize being against Muslims to their benefit. Yes, we can. Unfortunately, it's sad to say, but yes, we could expect anything, a repeat of 9/11. As I said, especially if things escalate directly between the United States and the other parties. But this should not prevent us from speaking the truth. If we do something, obviously, so alhamdulillah, we have like Brother Tawfiq, Anwar, and so forth. We just have to make sure that the best that we're doing, what we're doing is legally, and what we're speaking is legal. That might not help us in the long run, but at least we make sure that what we're doing is legal, and then hopefully, inshallah, we can get the word out. We can still make jihad by the tongue in that sense, and if not, at least jihad in the heart, inshallah. So no matter what the circumstances are, as the Sheikh was saying, no matter what the circumstances are, we have sometimes different obligations, but we have to, inshallah, do our best to fulfill those different obligations under different circumstances. So,
Inshallah, there's a question yes here. Yes, sir.
So, as you mentioned that the nations cannot do anything. So, as a ummah, can we make it at least a resolution blaming the Israel that they have to pay all the damages, all the genocide they made?
So the question was, you mentioned that nations individually can't do anything, but can the Ummah together at least come up with a resolution condemning what's going on in the Palestinian-Israeli conflict?
Resolution and talk is pretty cheap. To be frank, I was a little bit surprised that when South Africa took their case to the ICC or the ICC. So when South Africa took that case, among the groups, organizations, or countries that supported that was actually the OIC, what used to be known as the Organization of the Islamic Conference. I forget, they changed the meaning to OIC now. But the idea of like putting out a resolution there and condemning, of course, talk is cheap. They've done that kind of thing before. But as I said before, we're talking about different nation states. And it's not a coincidence, by the way, it's not a coincidence that when the colonialists basically essentially created these nation states, they pretty much created them in such a way that they are not going to be very powerful. So now you have each one of them concerned about their own national interest, and the Ummah interest isn't there perhaps when it comes to actually doing something other than talk. But at least you can argue that at least there's some talk, something has already been done. At least they have supported this, the claims of genocide against Israel and the international court.
Take a question from the sisters. Yes, ma'am.
I feel like there's a few groups of people right now in this scenario. The
either like relative Palestinian people, whatever their faith is, or caring about human rights, you either don't care, or you're actually going around spreading propaganda saying that if you say free Palestine, you're actually calling for the annihilation of Jewish people. It is obviously not true. There's so many Jewish people that are speaking out against this. But I feel that those are the perspectives on the issue, and what's unfortunate, like in my profession, I shouldn't be speaking out. I feel I can't really be silent because my voice is important and it is heard. So I'm trying to spread just like the perspective of what Palestinian people are going through in general, even though it's kind of like I'm putting myself at risk like anyone else. It's really like we've heard of people in professional situations that are getting fired or terminated for speaking out. But that's really at the lowest point. What we have is really our voice, and that's we have our voice if we can't do that.
So the sister was saying she feels that in this conflict there are different sides. Some people not speaking at all, some people speaking with propaganda, some people speaking for the truth. And even though in her occupation she shouldn't be speaking, she could get fired, she could be in trouble, she felt that her voice is important. All we have is our voices, and so we should all be speaking against the genocide and for the truth, even if there's risks to us. That we should speak still for the greater. Thank you very much. Is there a question from the brother side?
Probably maybe we should, brother, we should
Oh, take a question.
comment something about that.
Comment on that? Does someone want to comment on that?
I think we should.
I think there is, we all know the hadith of Prophet ﷺ, when the Prophet ﷺ has told us that if we see a munkar, whoever among you sees a munkar, فَلْيُغَيِّرْهُ بِيَدِهِ, that you should change it with your hand, فَإِنْ لَمْ يَسْتَطِعْ فَبِلِسَانِهِ, and then if you cannot, then by your tongue, فَإِنْ لَمْ يَسْتَطِعْ فَبِقَلْبِهِ وَذَلِكَ أَضْعَفُ الْإِيمَانِ. So otherwise, you change it with your heart, and that is the weakest manifestation, basically, of Iman. So I think it is important. We all want to contribute in some way, but it's very important. So this hadith of Prophet ﷺ says, if you cannot change it with your hand, then with your tongue. So what does it mean that if you cannot change it with your hand? So one of the key things of like what does it mean that you cannot change it with your hand? Basically, if by changing it with your hand you're going to produce a greater munkar, if you're going to create a greater evil by trying to get rid of a smaller evil, then this means you're not capable of changing it with your hand. If the end result of what you're going to do is going to be a greater evil, then this means that you cannot change it with your hand and then move on to the next step. And even if you're going to speak, if that speech is going to create a greater evil, then you also don't speak. It's not going to be obligatory on you to speak. Now, evil, of course, evil could be in a community sense, but evil can also be with respect to an individual sense. And let's say like you are a husband and a father. You have a wife and you have 3 kids, for example, and you are working in a private company. So again, Brother Tawfiq in the opening session, he talked about the fact that if you are working in a public for the state, for example, or if you're in a public university, your free speech is more protected. But if you're working for a private company and you say things that go against what that company likes or they consider like immoral or something like that, well, then you can get fired. And so for someone to say, okay, if I speak, number one, what really is going to be the benefit of me speaking? So as I said, alhamdulillah, there's a lot of people speaking now, and even a lot of non-Muslims speaking about the situation. So you need to weigh, like if I speak, like what's going to be the benefit of that versus if I lose my job. Is this going to be a greater munkar for me personally, for my family, and so forth? Is this going to be a greater munkar than for me to speak? Or at least, or so some people might decide that the greater munkar is for me to remain silent. They may make that decision that the greater munkar is for me to remain silent, and so they will speak. They'll speak come what may. They might lose their job and so forth, but they will speak. But you may have to make sure that you make that conclusion that speaking is going to produce a lesser munkar than remaining silent. But if you conclude that remaining silent in your position is actually better, given your capabilities, then you should remain silent and leave it for other people to do who may not be facing those same challenges.
Any questions from the? Yes, sir.
So just about the hadith that was said, وَذَلِكَ أَضْعَفُ الْإِيمَانِ. So does that mean that my iman is so ضعيف or that because the environment that I did not create, how can my iman be so ضعيف and it's not in my capability, or does it have any other interpretation?
So I might have to answer the question since I brought the hadith. So the brother is asking about how does that work? Why at the end it says like that is the weakest iman, and that's why when I translate, I actually throw a word in it that's not in the Arabic. I said the weakest manifestation of iman, because iman, if iman is in you, it should move you. Iman is going to move you. But sometimes there's limitations on what you can do. So this is clearly a hadith which is basically saying sometimes you don't have the capability to do this, sometimes you don't have the capability to do this, and so you have to move to plan C, for example. And there's two ways in which this can be interpreted to understand this. So number one is like the interpretation that I gave, and that is the weakest manifestation of iman. So basically, if you're not capable, because of the principles that I described, to do any of the other two, you are still going to be having that hatred in your heart, that like readiness in your heart, and that's basically like going to be the least thing that's going to be the product of your iman. That readiness in your heart, that opposition in your heart, that maybe if you get a chance to do something, then you will do it. The other interpretation that you find in some works is, of course, al-iman is both statement, it's a belief in the heart, statement in the tongue, and it is the actions of the limbs as well. So basically, even though you are restricted, the reality is you are not doing those other actions, and so in that sense, the iman, in the sense of the actions that form part of your iman, is going to be the least in that case. But I think the first interpretation is probably stronger and better. Allah.
Come back to Sister Sam. Yes, sir.
The speakers were always talking as if it's either we talk or we do, but I think there is a whole spectrum of different things we have to do. And I'm going to hone in on one example. For example, are our lectures that we hear on Fridays going to be, for example, dedicating more stuff about the history of Palestine? Are we going to make for our youth and our messages more programs that make them feel a little bit more savvy about what they do? I mean, we don't have to change the actions to just solve the problem of Palestine now, but we should probably be able to change how we do our business as Muslims, or how we work on our faith, so that we are better off tomorrow than what we were today. Is there any advice about all the spectrum of things? Would we basically be willing to invite specialists that come in here that talk to us about that? What do we do as Muslim Ummah, for example, when we look at the people who speak the best about this are basically non-Muslims? Should we, for example, just be writing them a thank you note and showing them our support? Like all of these kinds of things. It's not just we talk or we don't talk. I'm sure there is a whole slew of things that we can do that are legal, that are okay, that do not bring us any problem. We would like to see more of these examples, okay? Talked about. Can anyone on the panel just talk to us about these kinds of things?
Sorry?
Is it okay?
Of course, please join us. Please. No, please, you're on the speakers, of course. Forgive me for not inviting you up, I didn't know you.
I came late, my bad. All right, so now I apologize for coming last minute. Actually, I was sitting there the entire time, but anyways. So one of the things I wanted to mention earlier as well with regard to how, and this coincides with how we will be treated within society and what we should expect, et cetera, and what we should do about it. I think the solution, there are immediate solutions that we can, that we often, we are reacting to. It feels like, sorry, I'm getting a little incoherent. It feels like that many of the solutions that we have tend to be reactions. We're waiting for something to occur and then we react. We wait for something to occur and react. There seems to be this consistent pattern that every few years something happens in Palestine and we react. We do the same thing over and over again. The results remain the same every single time. And there has to be considerations for a long-term plan. Because what are the reasons? Why is Palestine suffering? Why is it that Muslims can't do anything? And it goes down to a number of issues. We are weak. We're incapable. We don't have the money. We don't have the power. We don't have the influence. So maybe one of the things we should focus on, instead of specifically what do we do for Palestine, is how do we get the power? How do we get the influence? How do we get the money? I know this seems like just worldly issues, worldly things to consider, but really, we don't have the capabilities to respond even if we wanted to. We keep talking about this because we're not unified enough. We keep talking about we don't have enough faith. Yes, these are all true. But what are we doing to build this long-term plan to gradually make ourselves capable? This goes back to what I was talking about earlier with regard to our technological and scientific lack thereof, our inability to do anything, our inability to provide alternatives to anything. You know, one of the, I know this is maybe not completely analogous, but I find it funny, so I'm gonna bring it up. I don't like this person, by the way, but Elon Musk confused everyone, and it's quite funny. He took over Twitter. One of the biggest propaganda machines, he just took it over. He just paid a lot of money and just took it over. Now he literally controls like almost all the news in the world. We have more money than Elon Musk. Why? I know it's a silly example to bring up, because he's kind of a joke, but honestly, he literally controls one of the biggest propaganda machines in one single man, because he just had a bunch of money and a bunch of influence, right? What are we doing to counter that? You know, what are we providing? What are we creating? We want to help the Palestinian people. We need to be able to, but we're not even empowering ourselves to do that. What can we do for them? What can we do every single year? What can we do? What can we do? We send money. We talk to people. Oh, please do this. Oh, please do this. Help us, Kufar, please. Just come on our side and things will change. Yeah, no, that's not going to happen. I'm sorry. We have to do it. And the first thing we need to do is make ourselves capable, that we don't have to beg them for anything. Sorry, just.
Can I comment as well?
Yes, okay.
I want to say something mean also.
Please, don't say something.
You know something? So what the sister is saying is so good, right? And there's so much more to be done. But sometimes we don't understand how behind we are. Wallahi, and I'm not trying to be nasty on purpose yet. Okay, so you Californians are a little different maybe, all right? I used to go spend Ramadan in Brooklyn every year, all right? And one day I said the worst word possible. I said voting, and everybody lost their mind. Like, you think all Muslims in America are like you. Do you understand there are so many Muslims, like voting is the most haram thing. And that's the weapon here. That's how you get power. You know, AIPAC gives $100 million every year to, to senators, to lobbying for Israel. Imagine we tell the Muslim community all around the U.S., we're going to gather $100 million every year, and we're going to give them to senators and people running for Congress for their campaign. You just tell me what the reaction will be. Like, we're just going to, they say what, Islamic Relief gives $100 million a year for charities and what have you, that's what they gather. Like, imagine $100 million, we give it to senators. How will people feel about that? How will people feel about that? Forget that. Right now in this masjid, I'm not picking this community, pick any community and say, brothers and sisters, we need to expand the masjid, it's gonna cost this much, and there's a box for the masjid. Brothers and sisters, we need to help students who are brilliant get scholarships, there's a box to gather for that, okay? Which one do you think will have more? Forget any masjid in America, pick any Muslim country and say, this money is for a building, this money is for humans, which one will get more? We're just into buildings and construction and mush araf ish, and we'll put into inanimate objects. We don't understand the concept of giving millions and to campaigns and to lobbying. When every time one of the mashayikh was telling me, I'm not going to mention his name nor the city, but he said I had a meeting with all the Muslim organizations, and every one of them wanted to be the first one to put a statement about what's happening in Gaza in the name of the Muslim community. Oh, great, that's your time to shine, huh? Now you want to put a statement, you want to put your name on it, so this is the official Muslim stance, and my organization is the one putting it. He said, that's not how you help Palestine. He said, throughout the year, what do? He said, which one of you, during the year, without any bombing happening, goes and approaches senators and congressmen and tries to change their just now, while the bombs are dropping, you think you're going to change? How is that going to work? So I'm sorry, Andy, but we're like really, really far behind. And politically, it's very frustrating. You know something? One of the most refreshing things for me was to meet Muslim Republicans. In Virginia, 23 years, I met one Muslim Republican, and everybody treated him like he left Islam. Why are we so behind? Are all Jews Republicans? Are they Democratic Jews and Republican Jews? But like almost all Muslims are Democrats. I went to Texas, I found them some Republican. Why are we just with one side? Why? Why couldn't we think this ahead 30 years ago and say we need to be in both parties? Why couldn't we think that way? It's so weird, yeah. It's so behind. It's so backwards. It just shows that we don't understand the lay of the land whatsoever. So, yeah, there's big talk and big things that should be done, but we're not there yet. We're still, brothers and sisters, the masjid has no dome, and we need a dome. This is a true story. After Isha, the masjid has no dome. You know, salah is not accepted because the dome takes the salah. Well, you understand, right? That's the issue. We know this, right? He said the community dropped $650,000 impromptu fundraiser after Isha for the dome. Tell them there's a sister, the mother of 12, dying right now. We need heart surgery. It's going to cost, $150,000. Yeah, let's see how much we'll get. But the dome, $650 like that. So and this is just trying to be realistic and not just nasty with life, but we're so behind. Yeah, there's so much to be done. But we relegate it to just boycotting, no Starbucks, no McDonald's. We're good at that. Let's support kebab restaurants, brothers. We're good at that stuff. We're far behind, I'm sorry, that's the reality.
Of course, I'm glad you brought up the example of the Jewish community, how they lobby and stuff. They're smaller than we are, and they have less money than we do, and yet they control most of the U.S. politics. So why can't we outdo them? Number one. Number two, your consideration of the boycotting. Yes, I understand that is something that I think it's virtuous that we're trying to do something, right? But honestly, let's think about this, right, as a long-term plan. What are the companies going to do eventually when they start losing money? What do you think they're going to do first? Do you think they're going to shut down? Or do you think they're going to fire all the people below them to save all that money for the CEOs who don't make the money anyway? I mean, yes, it's going to cause some effect, but is it going to cause a long-term effect that's actually going to change the reality? Or is it in the next 2 years, it's just going to happen again? Oh, let's do another boycott. Okay, let us fire another group of people. And again, 2 years later, same thing. It's not going to do anything more than a temporary fix. It's going to be a Band-Aid, right? Because that's literally, when I came to Islam, one of the first groups I started to join and support prior to be part of the MSA was Students for Justice in Palestine. For 2 years, I was very passionate about that. And since then, it's been almost 15 years. It seems like the same pattern every year. It's the same pattern. It has not changed. The solutions that we have, the reactions, the bombings. I think the only thing that's changed is the bombings. They got worse.
طيب I actually have to end here. I'm so sorry. I know we have hands, but I've been told to let everyone know respectfully that everyone will be here inshallah tomorrow. We'll pick up where we left off. It's getting late. Thank you so much for our panelists, and thank you so much for attending. And inshallah, we will see you tomorrow starting at noon, 12 o'clock, inshallah.
So we're going up for his.